Well, we have conflicts and we have opportunities. So let's talk about the conflicts first. We are certainly concerned about the situation in South Sudan that continues to boil as the IGAD negotiators are attempting to keep the two parties at the negotiating table. Central African Republic is high on our agenda. We actually see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel there. The fighting in Bangui has decreased, and as you know, on September 15th, the African Union peacekeepers will convert to UN peacekeepers, and we see that as a positive step forward. We have been very, very impressed with what the African Union has been able to accomplish there. The situation in northern Nigeria with Boko Haram has the attention of the entire world as Boko Haram continues to terrorize northern Nigeria as well as parts of Cameroon and other of Nigeria's neighbors. I'm kind of crisscrossing a little bit. Somalia, the situation there continues to be of concern, although we think for the first time in 20 years Somalia has an opportunity to move forward in a peaceful way, and we were very, very pleased with the news last week that a major al-Shabaab leader was taken out. We're very, very worried. It's not conflict, but the situation with Ebola in West Africa affecting 3 countries, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. While it's not it's not fighting, we see it as a security issue, and the president has indicated that this is a national security priority for the United States. So those are the major ones that are keeping me awake at night. And I also am buoyed by the positive things that are happening on the continent as well. As you know, we had a summit, and we talked about many of those positive areas, and I'll look forward to discussing those with you. Well, I think it's not only what we gain as a country because we're contributing to world peace, we're contributing to peace on the African continent, and we're contributing to prosperity. So it's what these countries gain from what we contribute to their efforts to acquire peace that is important for us. And also we know that if these countries are not at peace, if these countries are at war, if they are producing refugees, if they are involved in conflict, that we come in as well on the humanitarian side. So there are huge costs to the United States, to the American people, to conflict in Africa. Those conflicts tend to boil over. We see evidence of those conflicts as we see organizations like al-Shabaab targeting Americans and even making efforts on this fortuitous day, 9/11, that we're doing this interview, that we know that terrorism can affect us here in the United States. They not only have they threatened to destabilize Mali for a brief period of time, they actually did destabilize Mali. And fortunate for Mali that the international community and Mali's neighbors came together to support Mali's efforts to repel the forces of extremism, and Mali is on a positive track now. It's still a work in progress, but it could not have been done without the coordinated support of Mali's neighbors and the international community. Well, we have, that list is very, very long. We have been a huge partner with Africa for more than 50 years, initially as development partners, supporting their development as a partner responding to humanitarian crisis. African countries know that the U.S. is a country that they can depend on. We have been there supporting peacekeepers and training peacekeepers. We've trained more than 250,000 African peacekeepers who have participated in peacekeeping operations, not just in Africa, but in other places of the world. But now we're working on building democracy and governance, helping countries that are moving forward to build their economies, pushing investment in those countries, and encouraging American companies to take advantage of the opportunity that is being presented by Africa, that is fast growing, and Africa that has a bulging middle class that is interested in America, interested in purchasing consumer goods from the United States. So we see amazing opportunities for Africa's future, particularly their young people. As you know, we hosted the Young African Leaders Initiative Summit in Washington. Now the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, where we brought 500 of the most extraordinarily young, enthusiastic, smart, and creative young people to the United States, where we provided them with the opportunity to engage with our leaders, to engage at the university level and build their leadership skills. And they're now back on the continent showing what they got. And they're just a drop in the bucket. We had 50,000 apply for the program, and we will be doing the program again next year, and we hope to double the numbers in 2016. I think it is clear to every country in Africa that we're not just a country interested in resources. Are we interested in resources? Of course we are. But we're also interested in peace. We're interested in prosperity. We're interested in African countries building strong democracies so that people have a future. We're interested in human rights. We're interested in ensuring that the LGBT community gets equal rights in every country that we work in, but also all over the world. So our interest in Africa is much broader than resources. It's much broader than even our relationships with governments. We have relations with people. We are probably the only country in the world with as large a diaspora as we have, with people from almost every African country having a constituency here in the United States. So again, our interests are broad, they're multifaceted, and I think Africans know that they can depend on the United States across the board. Every single head of state that I spoke to after the summit said this summit was different. And it was different because of the unique business forum that we pulled together, where we brought African businesses and American companies and African leaders together in one room for a full day, where they can engage and talk about what the possibilities were for investments on the continent. The African leaders found this extraordinarily useful, and companies that I've spoken to, both American companies and African companies, have expressed appreciation to us for providing that opportunity for them. But the conference was also different in terms of how we engaged with African leaders. The president indicated that he wanted to have a dialogue. He didn't want plenary speeches where people would be talking into the microphone at themselves. He wanted people talking to each other, and that's exactly what was accomplished. And the leaders appreciated that, and President Obama appreciated it as well. We at the end of the summit, somewhere around $33 billion in pledges were made. Since the summit, additional business deals have been signed on. Boeing, as you know, signed a deal with the government of Ethiopia, and we were very, very pleased about that. We're hearing from companies that they're seeing their conversations with African countries get more positive. So we think the summit really contributed to all of that. Well, certainly peacekeeping initiatives. I think we are the leader in supporting Africans' peacekeeping efforts. We work very closely with the African Union to ensure that we're in line with their desires on peacekeeping, and then we've worked bilaterally with countries to make sure we're providing them the support they need. During the summit, we announced the Security Governance Initiative, where we will be working with 6 African countries to help build their security apparatus and the governance around their security apparatus so that they can better respond to peacekeeping. We also have a new peacekeeping effort, APREP. It's one of our many acronyms, so if you ask me what it means, I may not be able to tell you, but it's the African Peacekeeping Response Initiative, where we will again be working with another 6 African countries to help them respond and be prepared to respond quickly to peacekeeping needs on the continent of Africa. I think there are always needs to tweak programs as time passes, but PEPFAR has been extraordinarily successful. PEPFAR has contributed to a new generation of African children born without the threat of dying before the age of 5 because of HIV/AIDS. It's contributed to a generation of Africans who have survived HIV/AIDS. I don't think anyone thought 15, 20 years ago that people could survive from AIDS. This is a result of PEPFAR, a program that has had bipartisan support across administrations that has been appreciated by all the African countries who have benefited from it. You know, I'm asked that question all the time about China. And Africa is a huge continent. It has huge opportunities. It has huge problems. There's no need for the U.S. and China to compete over Africa's resources or over influence on the continent of Africa. African countries can really balance and complement what we have to offer with what the Chinese have to offer them so that they get the best benefit from both relationships. We have coordinated and cooperated with the Chinese in a number of areas on the continent. The Chinese have recently provided peacekeeping support to the new team that's going into South Sudan. There were Chinese peacekeepers in Liberia. When I was there as the ambassador to Liberia, the Chinese have consulted with us. We have a regular consultation with the Chinese government on where we can cooperate and coordinate each other's activities on the continent. So I see it as a complementary relationship. Do the Chinese have national interests that may not be in our interests? I would say so. Do we have national interests that may not be in the Chinese interests? It's possible, but for Africa, we have worked very, very closely together. I think we saw a huge impact of HIV and AIDS on Africa's human capacity. I'm pleased to say we've gotten beyond that so people can live and thrive and build their families and build their communities in spite of HIV/AIDS because of the programs that we have worked with them on through PEPFAR. That's a huge concern. It's a huge problem. It's an issue that keeps all of us awake at night. The attack on Westgate Mall in Kenya showed the impact that extreme terrorism can have on communities. We have been working relentlessly in Somalia with our partners there to fight against the terror threat that al-Shabaab poses. And we've had a great success in the past week with the elimination of one of al-Shabaab's senior leaders. We will continue to work with the neighbors, with the international community to fight extremism on the continent of Africa. And it's not about Islam. It's about individuals who are using Islam to push forward their extremist agenda that has terrorized many countries on the continent of Africa. I don't know that I can compare the Africa budget, AFRICOM budget. I wish I had AFRICOM's budget for Africa, but AFRICOM has been a great partner for us on the continent of Africa. I was there when AFRICOM was created, and there was concern that we were militarizing our diplomacy on the continent of Africa, and that is far from the truth. We have worked very, very closely with AFRICOM to coordinate our efforts to support peace and security on the continent, and I think those efforts are paying dividends for us now. $33 million in commitments came directly out of the summit, and we are now working to follow up on other commitments that are in the offing, and we're hoping that we have additional announcements that will come out in the coming weeks. But ultimately, what I can say is that it was an amazing opportunity to bring American companies, African leaders together in one room, and deals were made, and deals are in the process of being concluded. Investment in diplomacy, that means investment in people like myself. We are the premier country in the world. And people expect American diplomacy to play a role in every single action that takes place. So it's really important that we invest in our diplomats, that our diplomats are well trained, and that our diplomats are well cared for. As a U.S. ambassador and also as former Director General of the Foreign Service, my highest priority was to ensure that we provided the necessary support to our diplomats to do their jobs overseas. And that included ensuring that they had the security that they required to do their jobs, the security and safety of American citizens abroad, and security and safety particularly of our diplomats as they go out and live and work in places in the world that may not be safe is a high priority for the U.S. government. Yeah, we live and work in dangerous places, and the world that we live and work in now is not as safe as the world was when I came into the Foreign Service 32 years ago. So we know that we have to provide protection. We have a wall. We're here in the AFSA building, and there's a wall in the State Department that lists all of the American diplomats who have been killed in the line of duty. And that wall could be a lot longer. Many of us survived those efforts. And I think you're speaking about my own experience. I was in Rwanda during the genocide. I was threatened. I lived to tell the story afterwards. And I think it has contributed to me being even a better and a stronger diplomat. Well, I think most people have heard that I was on a temporary visit to Rwanda. I arrived in Rwanda on April 4, 1994, and everybody knows what happened on April 6th. I was in the home of the then Deputy Chief of Mission, and that home was directly adjacent, or next door, in fact, to the acting Prime Minister, Agath, who was killed. She was on a hit list. She called our Deputy Chief of Mission to say she was on a hit list. We made an effort to try to provide her sanctuary and protection in the Deputy Chief of Mission's residence. The security forces who were looking for her finally broke into that residence, and when they broke into the residence, they were looking for an African woman, and they found one, and that was me. They didn't know that I was an American diplomat. I think we were able to convince them otherwise after a bit of a scare, having an AK-47 cocked in my face and being threatened with my life. And again, I survived it. I see it as an experience that helped me build my character. But I'm also glad I survived because I had two little children who were in Kenya, and I really would not want my children to have had the experience of losing their mother in the line of duty. So it was, it was traumatic, but at the same time, when I look back on it, I think I'm a better person for having gone through that. There are many. I love being in the Foreign Service. I've done it for 32 years, and except for the experience in Rwanda, there are very few times that I've regretted anything that has happened to me in the Foreign Service. I think probably, and every Foreign Service officer who's ever been an ambassador will tell you that the fondest for me was serving as the U.S. ambassador to Liberia, representing the people of the United States to the people of Liberia. And I tried to live that motto. At the end of my first year, the local newspapers put out a newspaper and referred to me as the People's Ambassador. And I knew when I saw that I'd accomplished what I'd been sent out there to do, and that was to represent the people. And I enjoyed engaging with the people. So I was not an ambassador who sat in my office, who only focused on relations with the government. I tried on a daily basis to be engaged with people, to be engaged with young people, to go out to schools and universities and to markets, to talk to market women, and to just out in the street to talk to street people. I participated in a hot meal program to feed the homeless in a local church, and I saw these homeless people who were very threatening in the community change their attitudes on the streets, and I saw people change their attitudes toward homeless people on the streets because of this feeding program. So it's been great all around being in the Foreign Service. I'm shocked that it's been 32 years. What that means to me is it's probably coming to an end at some point, and I need to think about what I want to be when I grow up. If I have the opportunity to be a Foreign Service officer again, I would choose that. I was pursuing an academic career. I was a student at the University of Wisconsin. I was working on a PhD there. I got funding to do research in Liberia. And while I was in Liberia, I met people who worked for USAID and people who worked for the U.S. Embassy, including the person who would become my future husband. And I learned a little more about the Foreign Service. I'd studied it. I knew about diplomacy from the books, but I'd never seen diplomacy in action. And what I saw in action, I really liked. And I went back to pursue my academic career, and I taught for a couple of years, but my appetite to be in the Foreign Service was whetted, and so I joined the Foreign Service in 1982. I think we have a lot of challenges ahead as an institution. We need to do a better job, and we know that, of letting Americans know what it is we do for America overseas. It's not the perks that are important. What is important is how we represent the interests of the United States and what we do to protect Americans who are traveling overseas. So that's a huge, huge item on our agenda as we move forward in the future. We also have to continue to recruit for a Foreign Service that is representative of America, that represents the face of America, one that shows our strength in diversity, our strength as a country that welcomes countries. It's amazing to me when I go into an embassy overseas and our embassy doesn't yet reflect the face of America. I know then that we have to do a better job of ensuring that. So we have a lot of work to do in the future. We've done a great job. I'm no questions that we have a role to play in representing America, but there's still a lot more work to be done in ensuring that America's face continues to be the face of diversity and the face of power in the world. That's a great question. We do project American values. One of my most interesting jobs in the Foreign Service was being the refugee counselor in Pakistan and going into Afghanistan in the late 90s to work with the Taliban, to encourage the Taliban to allow women to work, particularly women doctors, because without women doctors working, women in Afghanistan didn't have access to medical care, to encourage education for women and girls in Afghanistan. And in one of those meetings with the then Minister of Health, out of respect for their culture, I wore a scarf. And I was accused by this minister of trying to impose U.S. values and U.S. mores on their country. And so I stood up, I removed the scarf, and I said, this is not my value. This is your value, that I wear the scarf. But my value is to ensure that your mother, your sister, your wife, your children, your girl children have access to health care because it's their right. And he made the decision to allow women doctors to go back to work and women to have access to hospitals. And for me, that was a major accomplishment.